Welcome to Roadie Wellness, where we explore all things health and self-care. Whether you're seeking mental clarity, physical fitness, or insight from students like you, we've got you covered. Hi, y'all. Welcome back to another episode of the Roadie Wellness Podcast. I'm Olivia Rathbun.
Hi, I'm Kelley Ryan.
And today we're going to be talking about consent. What is it? What it means? Do you mind just giving us an overview?
Yeah, so obviously consent, when we're talking about it in regards to if you're going to go hook up with someone, have a sexual encounter with someone, but consent is something we actually do in everyday life. Typically, when I talk to students about consent, I break it down to start with is like, what did you do today to practice consent? Did you ask before you went into someone's room? Do you ask someone before they want a hug? Do you ask before you can post a picture of them online? And all of those are really the basic beginner steps to understanding consent. And so when I talk about consent, I usually use the FRIES acronym, just an easy way to remember it, like FRIES, like F-R-I-E-S. And so consent is always freely given, it's reversible, it's informed, it's enthusiastic, and specific. And so what does freely given consent look like? I always say freely given consent means that no one is pressured. No one feels coerced. No one feels forced to do anything. They feel like they're able to make the choice that they want to. Another thing is it's reversible. And people kind of laugh at that one. Like, what do you mean reversible? That means that you can start hooking up with someone and you can change your mind. You can meet someone at a party and decide, let's go back to my room, we're going to hook up, and change your mind. It is always reversible. Another thing, too, is it's informed, which means you know exactly what you're consenting to. And that means that you know if you're consenting to just kissing, just touching, if consenting up to sex. It's enthusiastic. That really means that there's no doubt in the back of your mind that the person or people you're engaging in a sexual act with want to be there. That means they are actively participating. And it's specific. And that means every different sexual act requires consent. Consent isn't silence, right? You want to make sure that you hear the words yes. And most importantly, it is sober. So legally, and here at URI, anyone under the influence of alcohol or drugs cannot give consent to sex. And like being really clear about that. If someone is in a state where they are drinking and they're not going to remember how they got home, or they are drinking and they can't walk, they are having trouble talking, you wouldn't let them drive a car, that's someone who legally, and here at URI, cannot consent to sex.
Yeah, and I think that is an important thing to talk about because, you know, we're at college, there are parties where there's going to be alcohol or other narcotics or drugs, and people are going to be under the influence and wanting to hook up. So what is the consensus on alcohol and hooking up? Like, totally not okay? Is there a gray area? Let's talk about that a little bit.
What I usually say, the safest thing is to make sure, especially the first time you're hooking up with someone, that they are not incapacitated. And so that means that they are sober or they are not drunk and wasted. And it looks different. So what I usually say, too, is if you are at a party with someone, maybe you each had a drink, but you are both able to walk, you're both able to talk, you both are talking about your plans for tomorrow. There is no question in your mind that this person wouldn't be able to make a medical decision. Time has passed and you're like, this person can even drive. That is someone who is safe to be able to consent. If you are in a situation where you meet someone at a party and you're both drinking, and as the night goes on, and especially with people and nerves and parties, and you start drinking more, and you decide to go home with that person, guess what? If that person is in a state where they are now drunk, that person cannot consent to sex. And that is when we want someone to not. We want them to wait till the morning. And I always say, too, if you can't have sober sex, it's like my thing to say is you shouldn't be having sex at all. But really understanding, too, is that there are times where two students may have had one or two drinks and they end up in bed together and maybe they end up having sex. But guess what? When they wake up in the morning, that person is still there. They know what happened. They remember the details of the night. They know they both were active participants in it. That is not sexual assault. Typically, when we see alcohol used as a date rape drug, it is used to make sure someone is completely incapacitated, and that term blacked out, which means that the part of their brain that forms memories is actually shut down. And so typically when alcohol is used in a drug-facilitated sexual assault, it is used as a weapon. It is someone who is very intoxicated because someone is giving them a lot of alcohol. Someone is putting them in a situation where they are unable to consent. And I think that's what I usually say is the difference, is that power differential. It is someone being given a lot of alcohol. It is not someone who went out and had one beer, right? It is not someone who had one White Claw or one Truly. It is someone who's maybe given a solo cup full of jungle juice or a lot of vodka, etc. And it's really used where that person is not going to maybe remember how they got home or how their clothes were taken off or who touched them.
I think it might be a common myth that alcohol makes someone more likely to sexually assault someone else. Is that a myth, or is there some truth behind it?
Oh, it's a myth. And I think a lot of times what alcohol does is it makes someone's inhibitions lower and it makes someone have increased aggression, but it doesn't make someone hurt someone who wouldn't do that. So for example, I always, when I'm training students, I talk about what does lowered inhibition look like in a college student who's drinking? It looks like we just had opening weekend. What do students do with the yellow moving carts? They ride them down the hill, right? Yeah. That is a student who's drinking with lowered inhibition. It may make someone, when you're at a party, feel more comfortable dancing or going up to someone and talking, but it would not make someone who wouldn't sexually assault someone. That is something that people would do sober or drunk. And understanding, I always say too, is as someone who is almost 40 years old and who has drank alcohol before, I've never drank and hit someone. I've never drank and sexually assaulted someone because alcohol would never make me do that. Lowered inhibition may, again, look like karaoke, may look like being extra excited when you see your friends, dancing, etc., but it doesn't make you hurt someone. People use alcohol, I think, as an excuse for their behavior, just like whether we're talking about sexual assault or physical aggression in general or people fighting is alcohol just makes it easier for those behaviors to come out, but those behaviors are already there.
Mm-hmm. So it's all about the intention, not really the alcohol making that intention come out. Someone who has that intention is going to do it regardless if they have alcohol in their system or not. Yep,
and the alcohol lowers their inhibition, and they're already someone who's going to hurt and overpower and use themselves to hurt someone else. They'll do it with or without alcohol.
Okay. Changing the topic a little bit, what does consent look like within a relationship? Whether it's like a situationship or like an exclusive relationship?
Consent in a relationship looks like consent in any other relationship. And so remembering that just because it is someone you've hooked up with before, someone that you sleep with every Friday night, doesn't mean that every Friday night that person is entitled. And that whether you're married, not married, been with someone for 10 years, that each and every time you engage in a sexual act with someone, you deserve the ability to make that choice and for someone to respect you enough to allow you to make the choice if it's right for you at that moment or not. And I think that's a big thing, is you never want to assume someone's past behaviors or past actions dictate what they're going to do in the future. And so to me, being in a relationship is no different than whether it's the first or second time. You should always be checking in with your partner, making sure they feel comfortable, making sure that they emotionally feel safe, they physically feel safe. And during a sexual act, you should have ongoing communication with your partner. Or if it's the first time, that person you just met, you should have ongoing communication, because that in itself is the healthiest thing you can do. And making sure that the person or people you're with is comfortable with what's going on.
And I hear a lot of people discuss that sexual assault can't happen within a relationship. I believe it's a myth, but can I hear your thoughts on that a little bit more?
Oh, yeah. When we talk about domestic dating violence, it's physical, it's emotional, it's sexual. And absolutely, when I'm working with a student who comes in because they're reporting that they were in an unhealthy relationship, they were in a domestic violence situation, they've left, very, very common for them to report that sex was used as a weapon, or that reflecting back on their relationship is that there were many times in that relationship where they weren't able to consent. They were pressured. They didn't feel comfortable. They felt like they owed their partner this. And I think that's important to understand, too, is that just because you're in a relationship with someone doesn't mean that you owe them anything. And each and every time we want to make sure that there's consent.
So how do you ensure that you have consent, whether it's hooking up or within a relationship?
Asking, right? Making sure, asking your partner. Is it okay if I touch you? Do you like this? Can I kiss you? And continuing to check in. I think one of the hardest things, especially with your generation, is talking and being comfortable talking to one another. When you are engaging and hooking up with someone, you don't text back and forth during it, right? You got to use your words. And I think that can be uncomfortable. And when you're in a relationship with someone, it gets easier. But I think it's important for you, even if you're with someone, even if it's the first time, to make sure you're using your voice, to ask them what they like or what they don't like, what doesn't feel safe, what feels safe. And the more you do that, which feels unnatural, the more natural it becomes. But I really think it's really hard for people to ask consent, to be able to ask someone what they like or what they don't like. And I think the more people do it, and again, that's why when I talk about consent with students all the time, I'll talk about, like, what do you do in daily life? And the more you ask people for permission, even to enter their room, the more you get used to this notion of, like, how do you ask for consent? And it becomes more ingrained in how you talk to others.
I hear a lot of people in my generation talk about it being, like, awkward to ask for consent, or they're unsure how to talk about it.
I have a lot of students I work with, too, who are even afraid to talk about, like, are we using safe sex practices or not? And again, understanding that that's a part of consent. That is, you need to be informed. You need to be specific about what you're consenting to. And so having a discussion about what are we using for safe sex practices, asking someone, when was the last time you were tested for an STI? And all of those things, the more you do it, the more comfortable you're doing it, and knowing that you as a person are worth it.
Before we wrap up, a quick reminder that all information shared in today's podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. Thank you for listening to another episode of Roadie Wellness. If you like what you heard today, tune in every Tuesday on all podcast platforms for more. If you want to stay up to date on events and healthcare tips, please follow us at URI Health Promotions on Instagram. And if you have any ideas for future podcast episodes or more social media content that you'd like to see, please feel free to DM us or email us. Until next time, take care and stay healthy.